Hello, Waterford Wesleyan Church Online. My name is Pastor Matt. I'm the assistant pastor here at Waterford Wesleyan Church. And before we get into Pastor Paul's message today on joy, we just have a couple quick announcements. And the first is this. Well, it's the Advent season. And at the end of Advent season, we have Christmas. But before we have Christmas, we have Christmas Eve. And so we want to invite you to our 5 o'clock Christmas Eve service on the 24th, on Christmas Eve. That's Saturday, the 24th, here at the church at 5 o'clock. It's about a 45-minute service. And it's just a great time during the hustle and bustle of Christmas Eve and going to see family and just being able to have fun with our kids. It's just a great time to be able to fellowship with believers, one another, get our hearts right as to why we are celebrating this day. And it's quick. So we want to invite you to our Christmas Eve service on Christmas Eve at 5 o'clock to 5:45. Second announcement is, if you follow us on Facebook or on Instagram, you know that our Reels and our story, we've spent every single day during this Advent season putting out a video leading up to Christmas. So I just want to invite you to check those out. Again, we've been doing those every single day. We are still in the Old Testament, the prophesying of the Christ child, and we are just having a ball with them. So if you would you please check those out on our Facebook and on our Instagram page. So with all that out of the way, here's Pastor Paul.
December 7th just happened, and it was an ordinary day for you and for me. We probably just went about our normal routine, went to work, came home, watched TV, went to bed. Most likely. Now, that wasn't the case 81 years ago. 81 years ago on December 7th, the world changed. Matter of fact, the whole face of the United States changed, because December 7th, 1941 was what we now call Pearl Harbor Day. Now, Pearl Harbor Day was the day that the Imperial Navy of Japan surprise attack upon the U.S. Armed Forces in Hawaii. That changed the face of America. 2,403 servicemen, American servicemen, were killed that day. 1,178 servicemen and civilians were injured. 188 U.S. airplanes were destroyed, and 2 American battleships, well, they still are where they were that day 81 years ago. This time they're just underwater, and that's the Arizona and the Utah. 81 years ago was Pearl Harbor Day. It's the day that President Roosevelt said, "This is the date that will live in infamy." That day brought the United States fully into war, into World War II, until September 2nd, 1945, what we now call VJ Day, Victory Over Japan. And as I said, this changed the face of America in far too many ways to even define. I'll just throw a couple of them at you. One, we understood and unleashed the power of the American industrial machine. That was one thing we discovered. We also discovered that we were ushered into the atomic age, in which we're still feeling the effects of that even today. And there's something else that happened. For Americans, there was a naivety that we had of what was going on in the world. For example, we were exposed to the brutality of German concentration camps. And then, on top of that, we discovered a new level of devilish, sadistic torture carried out by the Imperial Japanese Army on prisoners of war. There was a certain naivety that Americans had that was stripped away when we discovered what was happening there. And it was bad. And I do not intend to give you any of the details. Matter of fact, there was a book I read about the invasion of Japan into China in the 30s, right before World War II really took off completely. And the author said, hey, don't read this chapter if you it's a little bit of discretion here. Don't read this chapter if you have a weak stomach. And I thought, come on. I've been desensitized to violence. I can handle anything. And I read the chapter, and I'll tell you this. I did not sleep right for a week. So the torture and the brutality and the sadistic nature of the Imperial Japanese Army was bad. I'm going to tell you this. Don't even Google it. Just trust me on that. Now, what America discovered beyond that horror, beyond the German concentration camps, again, was the darkness of the Japanese POW camps. The Allied servicemen in those camps lived through a literal hell on earth. They were beaten, famished, tortured, half alive, malnourished. I have a photo here, and you see this one that's here in front of you. This photo is one of the better ones. And I want you to just take a look at this. These are UK servicemen. I believe these are Australians that were rescued from a Japanese POW camp. And you can see these are men that are in their prime. They're in their 20s. And I mean, they should be robust and strong. And you can see how frail they are. You can see that they are malnourished. You can see that they are beaten. You can see there's sores on them. And you look at that photo and you're like, okay, that's tough. And these are some of the better photos. But there's something else about this picture that doesn't fit. There's something else as I look at it that doesn't fit what I should be experiencing. Looking past their physical bodies, I look at their face and something strange is happening. They're smiling. This picture, when you look not at their bodies, you look at their faces, what's coming out of that is a lightness. There's a joy that's happening in that photo, and that seems a little peculiar to me. They've just experienced hell on earth, and there's a lightness about their countenance. So, what is that? How does that happen? I'll tell you this. They were rescued, and rescue brings joy, and you can see it on their face. There's a true joy experience when you're rescued from a place that is dark, that is brutal, and you're starved. Because rescuing, very simply put, brings joy. For being rescued, now you have potential, like what my life can look like. Everything kind of opens up before you. The darkness that you're trapped in is now gone. Rescue brings joy, and that is true for prisoners of war. But it doesn't end there. Today, as we continue to examine the covenants that God had made with his people, meaning Adam, Noah, Abraham, and today we're going to look at a covenant that God makes with Moses. And we'll see in this that rescuing brings joy to his people, and he also shows his people how a way to maintain that joy. It's ultimately rescuing and then rules bring joy and maintain joy. Let's take a closer look at the covenant that God made with Moses. Exodus 20, beginning at verse 1 says, "And God spoke these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing the love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for your Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of the Lord will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. But now you figured out that covenant that God made with Moses was what we often call the Ten Commandments. And so you're, on some degree, we are familiar with that. But what I want you to note is this. When they were given to him is when God had rescued them from Egyptian slavery. It's what we talked about in our last video, how God was promised Abram that he would not only give him descendants, but then ultimately they would be enslaved and he would set them free. And here we're watching it happen. Remember, God staked his reputation on that. And here it's happening right before them. The Israelites are being freed. And don't miss this. The essence of God is freedom. It's who he is. It's what he is. Then there's a joy in freedom. We talked about this many times in the past where it's a joy not to just do whatever you want, but there's a joy and freedom to do what is right. And that is what God is establishing with his people right here in this covenant. But the essence of God is freedom. In the rescue, there is freedom. Just like we saw on the faces of those POWs, we see the same thing here in the life of the Israelites. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. God said it this way, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. The heart of God is freedom. and he rescues his people to set them free. God rescued the Israelites from a literal hell on earth to set them free to do what is right. Freedom is rescue, and rescue brings joy, and so do rules. And that's why he begins to establish this covenant. This covenant that God makes with Moses is rooted in establishing and designing joy into their lives and to maintain joy. So God makes this covenant with his people, and he says, if you follow these commandments, if you follow these rules, that joy you know from being rescued can be maintained. Rescue and rules bring and maintain joy in their lives. If you follow these rules, something profound is going to happen. The joy you know of being rescued will be a part of who you are. It will be maintained. Joy can be your lifestyle. And so this begs a question. How do 10 rules enable the Israelites to live in joy? I mean, first thing we have to do is understand that we generally respond to the word rule or command with like a negative connotation, like what's going to be taken from us or what's going to be stolen from us. I mean, we're freedom-loving Americans. We don't want rules, right? I mean, that gets in the way. Rules only inhibit our lives, is oftentimes our thinking. But that's not correct. And you know that. If you really think it all the way through, you know that's true. Rules don't take, rules actually give. Rules keep your life from going off the rails. I mean, the truth is, you know this. Rules and commands maintain joy in your life on a base level. I mean, I think about it this way. When my wife and I raised our children, we gave them rules. We gave them guidelines in their life, not to make their lives miserable, although they may tell you that, but we gave them rules so that they had less regret, that they had more opportunity, and establishing on a really simple level some opportunity to live in the fullness of life and to have joy, have less regret. So we know that, but it doesn't even end there. Here's a more simple illustration of how we know that guidelines help us. Think about guardrails on the side of the road. They keep you from going off the road, staying on the path. They keep you from going into a ditch or even worse. And no one looks at a guardrail as like a rule or a constraint and goes, oh, I wish they weren't there. I want to drive wherever I want. I mean, no one does that because we understand they're there to get us to where we want to go. And so we do understand that commands/rules, we got to take that idea of just all negative and toss it and realize that there is something that we gain and glean from that. Even from a human level, when we establish rules and commands, that we gain something from it. Now, when God does it, he establishes and instills joy in your life when you follow his commands. And that's essentially what's happening here. As God lays out these 10 commandments for the Israelites, he's setting them up to maintain joy. He's developing joy and a sustainable community of love and joy. So these 10 rules bring joy. Just think about it this way. I'm just going to grab you 2 of them. One of them is don't lie, and one of them is don't steal. Think about a world where nobody lies or steals. Think about a world where a used car salesman's not going to lie to you. Think about a world where a cell phone company doesn't lie to you. I mean, that would be an amazing place to live. Think about a world where no one at work lies or steals. Think about, just keep going with that. And you're like, wow, that would be an amazing place to live. It would be a wonderful place. That would be established a community then of love and joy. This is the covenant that God is making with Moses and his people. He rescued them. It brings joy. And he's like, here's some rules. You live these out. You're going to maintain that joy. And remember, God establishes these covenants then with Adam, Noah, Abraham, and now Moses to create people that live out God's lifestyle to the world around them. He becomes a representative. And the same is true here for the Israelites, that they are to live differently than the people around them when they follow these 10 rules. Not only will they live in joy and abundance, but then the world around them says, hey, you guys are different. This is how you live like no one else. It's the joy of rescue and then living and maintaining that joy throughout life. And this is still true today. Rescue still brings joy. For us, for you and me, rescue brings joy. It's through discovering who Jesus is. He brings us joy because he rescues us. Apostle Paul says it this way in Romans chapter 7. Verse 24 in the beginning of verse 25. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. Jesus is our rescuer. He rescues us from a sort of POW camp. Listen to what he says in John chapter 8, verse 34. Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Just like the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians and then set free, you and I are enslaved by sin. We're stuck But Jesus is the one who will rescue you. He's the one that when we trust him, he will forgive us of our sin. He will set us on a whole new path to live a life of freedom. And then he does something else, which you might not expect. He sets some rules. Now you might go, or you might think, oh, of course, there's all kinds of rules to follow Jesus. Actually, there's not a whole lot of them. One of the teachers of the law came up to Jesus and said, okay, Jesus, all of these 10 commandments and all the other rules we added to them, which one's the greatest of them all? Which is the most important one? And Jesus replies this way. Matthew 22:37-40 say this. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. You see, what we've got here is Jesus rescues us, and then he says, here's your rules. And they are, love the Lord your God, and love the people around you. He simplified it quite a bit. And when we come to understand that we've been rescued, and then we maintain that joy from being rescued by loving God and loving the people around us, that can happen today for you, and it can happen for me. We just need to go, okay, I do need to be rescued, and now I'm going to live that out. God rescued the Israelites, and he set rules for them to receive joy and maintain joy. And Jesus does that for us today. He rescues us from a sort of POW camp of sin. We're enslaved by it. He sets us free, he forgives us, and then we maintain that joy of being rescued by loving God and loving the people around us. We're rescued from darkness. We're rescued from the enemy brutalizing our soul. We're rescued from spiritual malnourishment in addition to everything else. And then comes joy. And that joy is maintained by loving God and loving the people around us. So for you and me today, are you rescued? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Have you let Jesus rescue you? And if you're like, yep, that's me, I've been rescued, I know that joy, but it's kind of dissipated. Are you loving God and the people around you? Because that establishes joy deep in our lives. Or maybe you're here today and you go, I've never been rescued. Maybe you're watching and you're like, I've never actually taken that step. Today's the day to trust Jesus. Today is the day to say, yep, I believe that your death on the cross was for me. I believe you come to rescue me from that sin that I can't get rid of. I keep going back to it. It keeps wrecking my life. There is joy on the other side of trusting Jesus. He's just waiting for you. He wants to rescue you from being a slave to sin and pour joy into your life. And then we maintain that by living that out to the world around us, loving God and loving the people that you come in contact with every day.